All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Blue Chair Chat as part of Engage Nova Scotia's series called The Meetup about quality of life and well-being. The Meetup is a way to surface stories alongside the survey results from the Nova Scotia Quality of Life Initiative. I'm Catherine from Engage Nova Scotia, and I'm happy to welcome you. Right now, I'm in Jabukduk, what is currently Halifax, known as Great Harbour in Mi'kmaq. Our guests and all of you are joining us from across the province, which is a part of Mi'kma'ki, the traditional and current lands of the Mi'kmaq that extend beyond Nova Scotia. Here in Mi'kma'ki, the peace and friendship treaties are foundational to our relationships with each other as well as the land. We are all treaty people, and we all have the opportunity and responsibility to learn about treaty. With deep gratitude, I'd also like to recognize the legacy of people of African descent here in Nova Scotia, where there are over 50 historic African Nova Scotian communities across the province. This year's African Heritage Month's theme was Black History Matters, Listen, Learn, Share, Act, a theme not only for that month, but for every day. Our shared history is important as we work for a vibrant, inclusive, and resilient province together. The focus of the Nova Scotia Quality of Life Initiative is to prompt fresh perspectives and new action by all of us that better balances our social, environmental, cultural, and economic priorities. So why blue chairs for our chat, like the one I'm sitting in right now? The blue chairs in our office have been home to thoughtful, challenging, and creative conversations between anyone who sat here. So for tonight, I invite you to consider all our chairs blue. We'll be together until 6 p.m. talking about the theme, Trust and Participation. How does our trust in others affect how we take part in the places we live, work, and learn? We're exploring trust in institutions and systems, as well as the ways we participate and engage in our communities, everything from volunteering to voting. I have big shoes to fill as I step into the role as host, and I ask you to please send get well wishes to Engage Nova Scotia board member Jamie Smith, who isn't able to join us. To meet up with one another after the chat, you can join Wayside, who we're partnering with to host the meetup. Wayside is a learning community led by inspiring communities where people across Atlantic Canada gather to learn and connect. You can create a profile there and join the meetup group to talk with others taking part. Plus, watch Blue Chair Chat recordings, and each week of the meetup has its own subgroup, so be sure to join the ones you're interested in. If you're already on Wayside, you know that I've been answering and asking questions throughout the meetup. But you can ask us questions about the Nova Scotia Quality of Life Initiative anytime by sending us an email to info@engagenovascotia.ca. Our guests tonight are Mayor Amanda McDougall, Rebecca Masai, and Tegan Daly. And a warm welcome to Andrea Lambert, who is providing sign language interpretation with us. Let's start our conversation off with introductions and a reflection from each of the guests about what quality of life means to you.
I can start if that's okay. My name is Amanda McDougall. I am the mayor here at the Cape Breton Regional Municipality. So respectfully and gratefully located here in Unama'ki. I guess when I think about quality of life, I remember doing my survey a couple of years back. And I know for sure through this past year of COVID, that definition has changed drastically. Where before I feel like my quality of life was more situated around moving up in my career and being out there, doing things, buying things, going places. COVID really, it brought everything back to the core, which is my family and spending time with my family and figuring out that I can both work and achieve my professional goals while also nurturing and loving the time that I have with these people I get to spend my days with. So I feel like quality of life is so different now. And I guess it makes me do my job different as well, because thinking about bylaws, thinking about decisions and budgets through the municipality, and thinking, how do we foster that kindness and love and happiness that we found during the hardest days. So yeah, that's where I am.
I would agree with you, Amanda. I mean, COVID has completely changed how we think about what's important to us. When I think of quality of life, I think about how can we live well, in our particular city or our area or our region. But COVID really shifted that narrative because now we were in a context where we weren't allowed to see our extended family members. We could only leave our homes for certain periods of the day. And I think it pushed a lot of us to think internally and to reflect internally on the things that we really needed to make it through that time and that period.
I'm Tegan. I'm a high school student in Dartmouth, and I volunteer with a few different nonprofits. So to me, quality of life means kind of a level of happiness and comfort and fulfillment we have in our lives. And I agree with what you both said. COVID has really changed how we kind of measure and go about improving our quality of life. Quality of life to me can incorporate like a lot of different things, like access to resources, healthcare, education, our human rights and freedoms, and all of those things. Every single one has changed with COVID, which really kind of has changed how we go about, living our best life. Not to be cheesy, but yeah, so quality of life to me just means your level of happiness and comfort and well-being.
If I could add one thing, I love when conversation is inspiring. And Tegan, I feel like there was a piece, I was listening to you, and I feel like part of the quality of life that I want to achieve is leaving a good legacy too. So is there a legacy of thoughtfulness, of mindfulness, of something positive in terms of change? So making sure that all of those pieces that make us feel happy and balanced are actually, kind of setting the path for more generation. And I'm kind of like way older than you two. So I'm looking at you like, oh gosh, you're so brilliant. And you're doing this at such a young age. And I'm almost 40 and I'm just figuring this out now. Like it's working, right? So the quality of life, it cycles, it continues, it allows for better to come.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you.
Thanks for those introductions and early yet really profound and generous thoughts. And I feel like, Amanda, to your last point about leaving a legacy and this notion of quality of life, and to what Rebecca and Tegan, you both spoke to as well, to do with relationships and the people in our lives and where we live. And I think that that relates directly to the main question that we're considering this week, which is, how does our trust in others affect how we take part in the places that we live, work, and play? So with this overarching question in mind, I'd love to hear some early reflections on that question. And it is really broad, and where we live and where we work and we play can be different places and also some of the same. Whoever gets off.
I'll start it off, yeah, because Amanda started us off before. So I really thought deeply about this question, over the last week when I was taking time to prepare for this. And I think that trust impacts every level of interaction that we have with other people. And I think it also has a strong connection to the level of engagement that we have with our environment. So I'm a relatively recent graduate of St. FX, the last year or so. It seems so much longer than it is. And in the time that I was in university, I was really involved a lot with student advocacy to the senior administration, but also provincially and federally. And what I found in that time is that relationship building has a lot to do with how politics are done and how decisions are made. And so we really had to emphasize strong relationships with different stakeholders, even as student leaders. But we also had to kind of bring forward to the forefront the interests of the people who we were representing, right? The students of St. FX. But I think it really does change how we relate to one another interpersonally.
Talking about politics. So it's so funny when you say the words where you live, where you work, where you play. I feel like being an elected official, that all melds together. So my work and my play and where I live, it's just all one. I live here in this community. I play here and I obviously work here. Things like going grocery shopping are, something that are necessary for me, but also a different platform for me to connect with people, because you could be buying some bananas and people, if they trust you, will go up and say, McDougall, what's going on here with that decision? I want to talk to you. So I feel like that melding of live, work, and play locations means that I'm doing something okay in terms of people trusting to be a part of all of those facets of my life. I know leading up to tonight and talking about this and thinking about this, when it comes to politics, you're right, Rebecca, like if the trust is not there from the decision makers, it trickles down and it enters every nook and cranny of our society. I find with our level of government, we're very grassroots. We're on the ground. We're the bottom, but that means we're really close to people. So if there is a mistrust from a previous administration coming in as a new administration and council, it's really difficult to regain trust. So when it's lost, it's so much harder to get back, and that is something that makes you work as an elected official, I think, harder and more passionately, because that trust is everything. You're right. That trust is why programming works or decisions are made well. And if it doesn't exist, that fracture just goes everywhere. It's like glass falling on the floor, smashed, but in a bad way.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Tegan was gonna jump in, but I was just gonna echo some of what you had said, Amanda, in the sense that when we start to lose faith, I mean, I'm just talking from a voter perspective or from the perspective of a constituency. When we start to lose faith in our decision makers and in what they're doing, I think we're less likely to engage in the systems that they're at the head of, right? And we're less likely maybe to access resources and programs that they're offering, which definitely has a larger ripple effect in terms of having a more largely engaged society and the extent to which each person is going to be contributing to their communities.
I completely agree with that. Even if someone new comes in and takes over that position from someone who wasn't previously trusted, it's still hard to trust a new person, even if they're completely, you don't know them. It's still they've come and filled this position that you already have distrust for. And it's really hard to give that trust back when it's been betrayed before or just not earned in the first place.
Yeah, I think that that really ties up both what Amanda and Rebecca were saying, Tegan, in that trust is so foundational. And without it, what can we achieve? And so each person has sort of touched on what the impacts of the breakdown of trust can be. And I know that you have experience, each of you, in terms of thinking about and working on what rebuilding trust looks like. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts, either, you know, your experiences or experiences that you're aware of that link to that.
I can share a bit. I'm in the midst of that rebuild right now. I feel trying to do things a little bit differently, and I feel like the word consultation is just everywhere in my mind. And it's exactly what you were alluding to, Tegan. You know, if you're going to rebuild trust, you better start listening first. And it's a really, really hard thing to do, especially if you are that person who is a decision maker, if you are that new person kind of fulfilling that role that was, you know, not greatly trusted. It can be really scary too, to go in and say, hi, everybody, I'm here to do things differently, jump on board. And when they don't, you're like, well, sugar, what do I do next? And it's just that. It's baby steps. It's listening. It's meaningful learning. I feel like sometimes it's easy to look at a consultation framework and say, oh, I have to do A, B, C, D, and kind of do the bare minimum of each of those things. And then to the wider public, it's really apparent that you didn't have your heart in that. You really didn't care about it. You just checked a box off. So kind of getting rid of those boxes and fully immersing yourself into consultation and that listening. It's a skill. It's hard to do if you're kind of trying to do that rebuild, right?
I couldn't agree more with everything you just said. To kind of piggyback off of what Amanda just said, I am involved with multiple nonprofits who are currently working on anti-racism programming and not laws, but, you know, kind of bylaws, I guess, within the organization. And it's hard to get people to trust you again once you've had issues in the past. And like you said, just checking things off a list and just going step by step isn't what helps. You don't, like, just one consultation or just one meeting with that group who you've so negatively impacted in the past, that doesn't help. You need to do repetitive, continual outreach work, and you really need to have the action there and to have your heart in it in order to kind of reach out and create that trust and build that working relationship with the community, or else it's not going to work. You really need to, I guess, just have that work ethic there in what you're trying to do, and not just, like you said, go down the list and check things off.
Yeah. I'm going to jump in, even though I know I'm the host, but the reflections and from what I'm hearing things like trust is relational, trust is vulnerability, trust takes time. Coming from a place of academia, trust sometimes is drinking tea with another person. And so, and getting to know somebody in a real way, which I think speaks to that, you know, letting go and dismantling of the boxes on the to-dos, but actually building really trusting relationships. Rebecca.
I'm so sorry.
No, go ahead. What were you going to say?
No, it just made me, I wrote something down, and it's, so recently with council, I introduced 2 new positions out of the mayor's office. So instead of having assistants, I wanted to have advisors. So one position is a municipal Indigenous advisor, because we really do not have representation of our Indigenous communities within the municipality. But so to me, like, how can somebody from Eskazoni or member 2 look at the municipality and see themselves as a valued part of the community if they are visibly not a part of it? But I wrote down, you're not always the best person to engage in that trust rebuilding. It's not always me who should be leading that charge because I might not have that knowledge. And I think that's something that's hard to admit sometimes because, well, let's call a spade a spade. You have to be a little vain to run for politics and think you can do everything. But, you know, I am not the person who knows best how to rebuild trust with our Mi'kmaq communities. Why would I want to be spewing out all the things that we should be doing instead of listening to those who are living this experience, learning from them, and then taking that education and doing better? So yeah, I'm not always the best person to engage in trust rebuilding. You have to trust those people around you and kind of bring in as much diversity and thoughtfulness as possible, which is tricky, again, when you're in these leadership roles.
I really like that the position you mentioned. I think that representation is really important in building trust. That's kind of my main thing, I guess, for my main feeling about building trust is just the importance of representation. And that sounds like a really awesome role to have for kind of taking that next step to make those connections and build that trust, I guess.
Rebecca, I'm seeing you nodding away.
Yeah. Well, it's really been interesting listening to the conversation. I've kind of been thinking of a few examples of trying to get meaningful consultation, but also regaining trust. So from a meaningful consultation perspective, so as part of the St. FX Students Union, I was a part of a group called Students Nova Scotia, which is a provincial student advocacy group. And we meet with, different stakeholders, the Association of Atlantic Universities, CONCEP, and these types of organizations, higher education organizations. And we also meet with labor and advanced education. And during discussions for the Memorandum of Understanding, the memorandum was signed, I believe, at the beginning of last year, after many negotiations and discussions. And one of the things that we had been advocating for at Students Nova Scotia was a set standard policy addressing sexualized violence on university campuses. So we wanted this to be, well, it was a part of the previous Memorandum of Understanding, but we wanted it to have teeth this time around, in the sense that there was actual points made about what these policies would look like. And, meaningful consultation was a large part of this, because we had similar to what Amanda had been talking about, grassroots level discussions with our students. And it's from their asks that we then brought it to our provincial advocacy organization, who then brought it into the MOU discussions. So that was one of the first examples that I thought of in my head when I heard that piece. But also to the same point of trying to regain trust, especially from groups who perhaps have been historically marginalized, or groups who have good reason to perhaps be mistrustful of larger institutions. I think there was a pretty key example of that at my own university recently, and I think perhaps more largely since the summer of 2020 in the revitalization of the Black Lives Matter movement, where you have Black people from all over the world advocating for equity, equal treatment by the justice system, but also wanting to hear a recognition of the historical wrongs that have happened against them, and a firm commitment to furthering policies and initiatives that will ensure that Black people would then be treated with equal dignity in whatever space. And I think about really key aspects of that movement in terms of policy change, in terms of culture change, and changes within institutions. And, it's a really long and arduous process, but there's still, I think, great strides that need to be made in terms of making sure that everybody around the table is coming with an equal understanding of the level of harm that was committed against, different groups. And so I was really thinking about that, both in what Amanda and Tegan were saying.
I can't help but be thinking of like the importance of truth to come before trust and relationships, which is what I'm hearing and what's coming to mind for me when you're giving those examples, Rebecca. Thank you. Amanda and Tegan, did you want to speak to anything that's coming up for you? Whether that be an example or additional thoughts to share.
What you just kind of summarized, Rebecca saying about truth must come before trust, pretty much. That is, I think that's something really important that isn't always, that's kind of implied but never really spoken about. That you have to be honest with the people you're trying to gain respect from, which doesn't always happen a lot, especially in like bigger institutions and stuff beyond the grassroots level. It's not very common. And I think that's something that is really important and needed to be said.
I think there's an association with truth that is often fear, because saying the truth is not easy sometimes, especially when you're taking a historical context. Saying the truth when it's not what the majority of people want to hear. And I think I'm thinking about this from like a municipal perspective and budgets. Like if we were going to cancel heavy garbage, people are not going to want to hear that because that is a very important service. So if we say, oh, we can't afford it this year, that truth is hard to say out loud, even though it's something so simple. But I guess that's it. Like the truth can be hard to say. And if it's hard to say, it's even harder to live. So I don't want to blame past generations, but I feel like even going back to my parents' generation and my grandparents' generation, there was this just way of being that you just didn't talk about things. You didn't talk about the truth. You went on your way, you did your things in the run of a day, and that's it. And you didn't talk about things like even your mental health, which even today I find, I'll hear these comments and of kind of the older generations out home who are kind, beautiful human beings, but they'll say, oh, buddy down the road has bad nerves. No, there's a mental health condition that we should be talking about and supporting. That truth is just so hard to say. And, it's just progress. It's hard. It's, I'm taking my baby to work and women are telling me that there's no way I could be a good mother and a good mayor. That's because they're afraid to admit that, oh, sugar, maybe it is possible. And we didn't have, we were too scared to admit the truth. So yeah, we have to build communities, build a society where you feel comfortable and okay with that fear, because you're going to be surrounded with people who will help you through that. And I think steps are being made. But that fear that's very, very real, and you see it often.
I think that kind of ties into the fear that people who are untrusting of, authorities, we fear that we aren't being told the truth, even if we are, because of historically being lied to. Or just not told the full truth and the full situation. I feel like that's going to take a long time to repair between government and people, and leaders of different organizations and the people who are part of those. I feel like it will take a while to kind of be able to trust that the people who are telling you things are telling you the truth, even if they are, to kind of build that trust back up again.
Then you have things like social media, which is amazing, and platforms like this, through the internet, that are bringing us together. But I find, my goodness, it could also be really, really scary and harsh and not well researched when it comes to truths being shared. So it's almost like we're always in this battle of, okay, what is the truth? Who do I trust? Oh my gosh, now there's this whole like social media world pounding on my head this way, and I'm trying to live in the real world over here on this side, and none of this is jiving. So it's as we progress, it gets so much harder to digest, I guess you could say, and kind of filter everything. So even things like simple questions like what is quality of life to you? Turning off my computer and my social media and not feeling guilty about it, because there's this like preconceived notion that I should always be working, but then also the guilt of being a crappy mom because the ladies down at the deli are like, oh, she can't do both. So it's tough. It's tough. And like, I feel like everybody in this conversation is involved in inspiring change in their communities to do better and build trust and have all this honesty. But wow, it's tough. It's a tough road.
I really appreciate the honesty and generosity of what, Amanda, you're sharing, and also all of the guests. And so what I'm hearing in some of the conversations are like the potential impact on our well-being, because we know that there has been declining trust across the board for many years in our institutions and our systems. And so I do feel in many cases we're in this instance where there's trust being need to be rebuilt on so many levels. And the impact, though, is that we wonder whether or not our participation in certain systems and institutions can make a difference. Like, does our participation make a difference? And if our trust is lacking, then we trust our ability to make change less. And that can affect our participation in our communities, from that spectrum of volunteering to voting and everything in between. And so I'd love to hear each person's thoughts in terms of like how trust can affect our participation and how in our communities and our engagement in our communities, and what sort of impacts and how that manifests in terms of our individual and our collective quality of life and well-being.
I can start us off, I guess. For me, I do a lot of volunteering, and that is kind of my thing. It's something I enjoy doing, but it's also something that's really hard to do if I don't trust the people I'm volunteering for at a nonprofit or volunteering alongside. If I don't trust that they're going to take me and my identities seriously and respect me, then it's a lot harder to participate, and I know that's the case for a lot of people. Not being taken seriously is a big thing, especially within queer communities, and not being respected for who you are. And that's something that has affected me personally in volunteering and participating in different things academically and even job-wise and like employment and so on.
just to reiterate the question, we're looking at trust and participation and the extent to which it contributes to our communities and our society. And, maybe this is echoing what Tegan said a bit, but I think when you have higher levels of trust in those institutions or higher levels of trust in the communities, you'll have higher levels of participation and you'll have more engaged communities as a result, right? I think the more that people believe that change is possible, the more likely they will be to act or to do things to try and achieve that change. And I have to say, Amanda, it's really refreshing listening to an elected politician. Granted, it is municipal politics, so I think that constituents are perhaps closer to municipal politicians in comparison to perhaps federal or provincial politicians. But it was really refreshing to hear about government as being the grassroots, or government as listening to people on the ground, because I think that's oftentimes where there's a bit of a break. Sometimes there are things that are available and resources that are available which are perhaps not the most pressing to address the needs of those in the community. So I thought that was a very interesting piece. But, from a student politics perspective, grassroots leadership was one of the things that was key to the campaign that I ran when I was running for president, and it continued to be a priority throughout my term in terms of hosting, consultative meetings with students, in a meaningful way where we actually took their suggestions and would present them to admin or to provincial and federal leaders. But doing it in a way where it continued to be a very genuine and honest conversation, where we were still willing to take criticism and, kind of hold on to it, reflect on it, and do our best to address the root of that criticism that was coming towards us. I would always say to my, colleagues that sometimes being in a position of leadership is really, taking it on the chin and admitting where you went wrong, but always having the action piece behind it.
Oh man, I'm so happy that you talked about the need for those people who are in those leadership positions to be able to learn from criticism. Now, that being said, I think there's also, with trust comes respect. So, of late, there's people who will do things, because I am an elected official, it's easy to throw out comments and say horrible things, but just because you don't trust the institution doesn't mean you can throw out unnecessary criticisms either, because it's just furthering the divide. That the work of rebuilding and changing is not just on the shoulders of those in leadership positions. You have to have a community around you as well that you equally can trust to help guide you, right? It's such we talk about work-life balance, like we have to talk about decision-making and community balance. Like we're literally all in this together. We're all neighbors. And, perhaps I look at this role very differently than those in the past. And maybe there was this era of being above the, people in the community because I'm an elected official, but that's gone. That's done. We have so much work to do to repair so many things of the past that has to be gone. And I think that, being that person and actually living and being that grassroots leader, that speaks volumes. But I don't know. I find some of the criticism that I'll get is my son has Down syndrome. He's 4 months old. He's an infant. Somebody's using this against me as a criticism. That is so the opposite of being constructive. You can be frustrated, you can be angry, but personally vilifying and attacking people just because you don't trust the institution is not going to help either. So there has to be this respect and responsibility on either end. And I don't want to say like elected officials, wash some of that responsibility. No, we all have a collective responsibility if we want to learn, if we want to do better. So even calling out those behaviors or people that are kind of encouraging that crappy behavior of the past to continue, we can all do that together. Then we all trust each other because we're standing up and we're doing it together. It's hard. It's super hard, but I see it. I see glimmers of this wonderful growth all the time. And that's why we keep doing it, right?
I liked what you said a lot. I think constructive criticism is kind of what I was getting from that. Not just saying, here's what you did wrong, but also here's what you can do better in the future, and here's how we can fix this and build these relationships. And I think that's really important, that we don't just give negative, you suck because you did this and whatever, but saying this is how we can fix this. Can we work together on this? I think that's really important.
I'm hearing huge themes of accountability and what it means to hold people accountable, but also the things that you're holding them accountable for. And there's this, we've been saying like relationships and things are building trust is relational. And I think that part of that can come out in terms of being respectful with one another. So I think that, demonstrating respect can be shown in terms of the way that you're calling someone in and how you're holding them accountable. And then, Rebecca, I'm hearing, there's such respect in terms of engaging meaningfully with students, and then students being able to see that the people who have asked them for their input are doing something with it. And I see that in municipal politics too. And I see that those possibilities in terms of Tegan, volunteering. If an organization that you're working with or you're volunteering for, or your municipality or your student leaders are asking you, we want to hear from you, tell us what you think. It's the utmost respect for that organization or person, whether it be a friend or a municipal leader or any politician or a student leader, to then take what they've heard and apply it. I think that that's being accountable to what you've heard and being accountable to the people who you respect and you want to work with and you're serving. And I think that sort of cyclical thing, when you keep doing that, when you demonstrate that, then you demonstrate that you can be trusted. You can be trusted with people's stories and people's information and their insights. And that cycle can keep, that circle can keep happening ideally in terms of feedback, literally and figuratively in terms of feedback. I really want to ask another question, because we've sort of been touching on this notion of like seeing change and there being like glimmers of ways that trust is being rebuilt better, and where we're seeing participation be strengthened and community engagement be strengthened. And so if anyone has more to say about that, or to speak to their experiences in terms of like what they're seeing or they're experiencing, I would appreciate that. And I think viewers would as well.
In the nonprofits that I work with, I guess, I see a lot of connections being built between different organizations. And I think that's really important, kind of building trust, not just with people higher up in government, but also at the grassroots level, building trust within like inter-organization, like crossover kind of programming and things like that, I think have been really important in building trust within communities in general, not just with people and then our leaders. That's been something really important that I've been really happy to see happening in the last few years.
I think from a from a community perspective, I find that in order to gain trust, there also has to be, I would say, almost a willingness or an ability to be vulnerable for a moment. Because I think when we're being honest or when we're admitting to a fault, there is a level of vulnerability that happens in that time. And I think if there's space that's allowed for that, of course, depending on the other person, but usually that's when you gain others' trust, when they also have the space to be vulnerable with you, and you can have like a real conversation without pretense. And I think it's from that first step that you're able to, begin building network of support, begin building a network of support and, having a really strong belief in other people as collaborators and as thought partners. And, that's, I think, when we can begin playing to one another's strengths within a community.
I think, well, specific to kind of my world and municipal politics, it is really useful and necessary to kind of remove yourself from the day to day. And, it's really easy to be stuck in the office and doing things and reading things and signing things and forget what's happening literally like on the road underneath my office and talking to people. And I don't want to blame COVID, but it's almost like this year has been really difficult to even remember, because you can't remove yourself from that grind and put yourself back into the places that your decisions are actually having impact on, and connecting with people and communicating with them and seeing firsthand impact of your work. And that, it's been I feel like I'm so negative. I'm really a happy person and I have a lot of hope, but it's been tough. It's really tough when you don't actually get to see a person or go to an organization or be in a place to really feel that trust, right? You're just, and likewise, I'm sure people are like, oh, she's just up there, right, in that office, and what is she doing? She's signing papers. So I miss it. And it's a really wonderful tool to like go immerse, learn, listen, touch, feel, smell, all of the things. But COVID has really taken that away from us. So trying to pivot and figure out meaningful ways to continue with that engagement, constructive criticism, learning, it's quite challenging. It is quite challenging. And I'm really excited that some of our restrictions are lifting and we'll be able to gather a bit more, because coming back to that initial concept of quality of life, gosh, it's hard to make decisions on how to improve quality of life if you're not out in the community witnessing what needs to happen, right?
And we know how important social connections are for our well-being, and social connections is like one of the pathways to trust. Creating connections is one of the laneways into building trust, strengthening it, rebuilding it, building it from the bottom. So those things are all really connected for me. Tegan, did you have any thoughts there?
I think just pretty much, like, I'm just kind of echoing what's been said because you guys are all brilliant. Sorry, I'm right in the sun here. I think, like you've said, the action really has to be there. there has to be intentional steps forward, and that's really hard during COVID. I mean, at nonprofits I'm at, we haven't seen anybody from our board or from the government like we normally would, and that's because of COVID, but it also feels like not abandoned, but kind of like you're not being heard as much, and it's hard to continue that connection and trust you have when you can't see the other person. So that's been something that's definitely been a big factor in how we participate in our community during COVID, because there's not as many ways to participate and you're not feeling as heard when you do.
I really appreciate that, Tegan. And it has me thinking about what we were talking about at the start of this, which is, what does quality of life mean to you? And we know that there's such a strong relationship between trust, in terms of like trust between our neighbors and trust of our leaders, and our institutions, and then also our social connections and the strength of and quality of our social connections leading to a stronger well-being. And what we spoke about at the start, though, were some of the ways and opportunities that COVID presented us to think differently about quality of life and well-being. And so similarly, I feel like in so many ways, since this pandemic has surfaced more strongly so many things, I'm hearing in our conversation today that it's also surfaced some of the opportunities and challenges related to building trust. And so I wonder, are there, and if so, what are they? What are the opportunities that exist that COVID has, maybe the circumstances around COVID have presented us with in terms of participation, encouraging participation, and building trust?
I think Zoom, like this has been a big thing. I personally did not use Zoom before COVID. I don't know if Zoom was a thing before COVID, but I've met a lot of amazing people through a lot of different organizations during COVID that I wouldn't have met without Zoom, because they live far away or it just wasn't going to be suitable, just wasn't going to work out for whatever reason. I think that online meetings has been a really good thing to come out of Zoom, that hopefully, or to come out of COVID, that hopefully we can continue in the future. Just meeting new people who don't necessarily live in your area, but have a lot to offer that's relevant to your life.
I think time. If anything, just having a little bit more time to sit back, to reflect, to, if you're in your house on your own with your cat, with your family, to kind of look around your space and really kind of dive deep inwards. Because I don't know about a lot of people, but, pre-COVID, you're just like, go, go, go. I was traveling so much for work and rushing here and rushing there. And, it's still busy during COVID. And like, you can have 7 million Zoom meetings, which could also be really hard and draining. But it's easier to take your computer and you close it and you're in your own space. And then you can take a few minutes and just take that time and say, how did that go? What did I learn? Was that a good experience? Was that a bad experience? And I think it also, even in terms of council, we made it a priority to begin a process of strategic planning, and find some directions where we want to move as a community. And, that thoughtfulness has come out of COVID for sure, because I know people have been at their highest highs and lowest lows in the past year. And it's all translating into the work that I see on behalf of my council and staff. It's pretty remarkable and beautiful to watch. But it's also like, as a leader, you're like, I want to harness all of this, because they're so excited and so geared up to do so many wonderful things. Let's do this constructively. So yeah, I think just that time to really consider and think and plan has been awesome.
I think that COVID was really a time for reflection and perhaps a time for reprioritization in a sense. Um, I mean, for myself, I recall I won't lie to you folks, at the very beginning of the pandemic, before we had a full understanding of what what was awaiting us, let me say. At that time, I was perhaps most immediately concerned with the fact that my university graduation was canceled. And that was really difficult because, Amanda had kind of talked about our highest of highs and our lowest of lows. And it was like this big, high, exciting time that I'd worked hard for was never going to happen. And I think it also reinforced to me maybe the importance of the ceremonies that we have. Like, I think sometimes we underestimate like the importance of like celebrating birthdays or celebrating milestones in our lives. But I think that's the way we mark time and the way that we mark progress because I think we really lost track of time. It's kind of similar to what Amanda was saying. It's really hard to think about what I did in the last year because I didn't really move or go anywhere. And if I did, that was then like a significant marker in life. And I feel that is probably similar for a lot of people. And then to speak to the reprioritization piece, maybe halfway through the summer when we really got a good understanding that COVID was here to stay. A lot of people were hurting. A lot of people were dying. A lot of people were at high risk and anxious. And I think that middle of the summer moment for me was really like, okay, we really need to try and fill the most basic things that we can at this point, being close to our families, making sure that we're taking the proper precautions to ensure that no one is going to be put at risk. And I think that COVID showed the extent to which people were willing to sacrifice, small luxuries for the greater good, right? For the beginning of the pandemic, and I know where I was in the summertime, there was like anti-masking protests. I was in Calgary at that time. And I think that was a really key moment for me. And it's something I still think about because, putting on a mask may be considered a minor inconvenience in that we're not used to breathing behind masks. But the benefit of wearing a mask is ensuring that our elderly, those who are high risk, those who are immunocompromised, then are able to better protect themselves against this virus COVID being what it is. And we're also contributing to our society by taking this precaution and this measure, and to really look at how many people were so unwilling to do what it took to ensure the safety of their neighbors or the safety of their family members, I think to me was really astounding. But that again links me back to the idea of priorities and, what are we going to prioritize for ourselves? Is it, worth not wearing a mask because we just don't like what it looks like on our face and extending the time period of the pandemic? Like, those are the types of things that I really had an opportunity to reflect on. And also, like, each of us has a role in ensuring that this pandemic doesn't go further and ensuring the safety of, our fellow members of society. And are we going to buy into that idea of helping one another, or are we not going to?
Rebecca, that is such, I think, an incredible question and thought to end this Blue Chair chat on. It speaks to the trust that we need to have in one another and the way that we show up in our communities. And I just wanted to quickly mention there was one comment in the chat. And so Marjorie noted that she doesn't often hear anything about people living in poverty, and that more recently there's been some recognition that older folks are marginalized as well. And so I wanted to point people and take this opportunity to note that this is one conversation of many that needs to be had, and thank Marjorie for bringing that up, and point folks to our website where there are some survey results related to people living with low incomes and older folks as well. And so my heartfelt thanks to you all, Amanda, Rebecca, Tegan, and Andrea. This was a wide-ranging and meaningful and thoughtful conversation, and I so appreciate your time tonight, and I appreciate everybody who's joined us here as well, tuning in from their homes as we do so safely. And I just wanted to repeat one more time that, as I mentioned, we can keep talking on Wayside. We've seen that this conversation, there's no end to this conversation, and there's no end to the work ahead of us of building trust and strengthening our communities. And so you can keep talking to one another and interacting by joining the Meetup group. And on Friday, we're hosting a Whiteboard jam session about this same topic as well. And that's on Friday from 1 until 2. So you'll literally put pen to paper in the workshop and be guided through a series of reflections and brainstorming activities. And you'll also be getting a feedback form because, like all of you, we're learning alongside you through this meetup, and your feedback's important. So there's a link in the chat, and it'll be in the follow-up email too. Next week's topic is our time. How does the way we spend our time, where and with whom, impact our well-being? And so with that, thank you, immense thanks to our guests and Andrea and everyone here, and we'll see you again soon.